Welcome to Africa in Focus on Afrique Today TV. I'm your host, Samuel Omwenga, and we're happy you're watching. Africa in Focus is a show that brings you news, information, and analysis concerning Africa in a manner that is conscious, accurate, and time-sensitive, time-conscious, because we are aware that many, if not all of you, do not have time to follow with the happenings on in Africa, let alone your own countries. So we've designed a show that sums up what happened in the continent within a week, and hopefully you can learn or find something that you haven't learned during the whole week about the continent. A big part of our show is to reinvigorate Pan-Africanism, which is a noble idea our brothers here in the United States gave our forefathers in Africa. And they've ran with it, and on that basis fought for independence, many of the African countries owe their independence to them. We hope to take this concept a little further with a real different thinking about it, and hope that we can, through shows like this, encourage others to join us as we reinvigorate that idea. We also hope that this show can encourage or inspire those of you who are not so inclined to want to be part of or participate in the political processes, both here in the diaspora as well as in our motherlands. This is important because if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it, and most of the leaders there tend to want to know, or at least these days they're trying to pay attention to what the Africans in the diaspora are saying or doing about the goings-on back in the continent. So we hope this show not only will it encourage or should encourage our participation in the political processes, but also to encourage those African leaders to do something about good governance, which must happen if Africa were to prosper as it should at all. So each week we have designed in a way that we can discuss 1, 2, or maybe 3 countries depending on time. We hope it will be one of your countries. If it's not, it will be some country, and all the issues we cover are going to be relevant. So if you've taken the time to watch the show, it will be time well spent, because you will definitely learn something or find out about things that affect all of us in the diaspora, and specifically our countries, the respective countries back in the continent. So come along as we put Africa in focus. Welcome back. You're watching Africa in Focus. This is Samuel Omwenga again. This week we're actually dedicating the whole show to highlight some of the events, some of the activities or discussions that took place during the second African Union USAID Trade Conference that took place in Baltimore, Maryland just a few days ago. Afrique Today TV, along with our strategic partners, HMG News, we're happy to say we were able to carry that event live. Some of you may have seen it. If you haven't, that is why we've taken time to do a show specifically geared toward covering what happened during the conference, in the hope that it can benefit some of you who may have interest in what's going on with trade relations between the United States and Africa, which was the purpose for this conference. The conference was hosted by the African Union through their mission office in Washington, D.C., working in conjunction with the United States Office for International Development, USAID, that is the acronym for it, along with the state of Maryland and the African Diplomatic Corps. Much of the conference was focused on discussing 2 important U.S. government initiatives. One is a government initiative called the African Growth Opportunities Act, which is actually a law that was passed about 20 years ago to promote trade relations between the United States and Africa, as well as Prosper Africa. It is also a government initiative, but the difference between AGOA and Prosper Africa is AGOA is a government-led, and Prosper Africa is led by the business community. Tarek bin Youssef, Charter Affairs for the African Union Mission in Washington, D.C., opened the conference and invited Maryland Secretary of State John Wobsmith, who welcomed everyone to the conference and noted the significance of hosting the conference in Baltimore because of the city of Baltimore Harbor's role in international trade, especially in shipments between Africa and the United States. Secretary of State was followed by Orrin White Shaw, who is the Deputy Deputy Assistant Administrator for Africa, USAID. That is the office that is in charge of promoting international business between the United States and foreign countries, and in this particular case, Africa. She is in charge of that office. We had a chance to speak to Ms. Weish after she spoke, and here's what she had to say about the conference.
USAID, or the U.S. Agency for International Development, was established back probably in 1960. Don't quote me on the date, but it's been around a long time. And it is the U.S. population, the administration's agency to work in developing countries and emerging markets to support the development of those countries. We've been doing that for a long time. We have done it in Africa for a very long time as well. We have missioned in probably 15, 18 countries, but we work in more countries than that. And we work in health, education. As you see in this conference, we're working in private sector development, trade and investment, women and gender, agriculture. So we work in a lot of different sectors.
And how is the agency working with AGOA? What is the relationship between USAID and AGOA?
AGOA was the Africa Growth and Investment Opportunity Act. That was passed almost 20 years ago. And one of the stipulations of AGOA was for USAID to create trade hubs to facilitate the trade of African products to the United States. There's one in Ghana, Nigeria. There's now actually one in Nigeria. There's a trade hub in South Africa, and there is a trade hub in Kenya. And that really is to provide support to entrepreneurs, to African businesses who are interested in trading their products to the U.S.
And in your long experience with USAID, what do you see to be the challenges still in getting African countries to develop or to become emerging economies in the world?
That's a bigger question than a couple of minutes. As everybody knows, African countries have enormous potential, yes. Right? But there's enormous challenges that vary from country to country. I tend not to talk about Africa as if it's a monolith, because the capacities, the opportunities, the resources vary from country to country. I think broadly speaking, though, however, the challenges are the ones we all know, quite honestly. It's the environment. It's the growing demographics of youth that's putting pressure on governments. It is corruption. I mean, we don't like to talk about it, but corruption is also the lack of transparency. And so for African countries to develop, there really is going to need, and we've been working with African countries on various reforms. I'm sure many of your viewers have heard about the various reforms. We've also initiated last year the Prosper Africa initiative, where probably 16 U.S. agencies are going to pull together to try to facilitate trade between Africa and the United States, as well as investment both ways. And so hopefully we will see a major pop in those numbers.
And one of the common complaints people make about Africa, at least you touched on some of it, is corruption, governance issues, rule of law issues.
Transparency is a biggie. That's whether it's at the port when you're trying to get customs through. It's consistency of the application of regulations and laws. So one can go and do a dog and pony about how many days it takes to clear stuff. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's never quite that when you get on the ground. There are the differences in laws and regulations. And this is a colonial vestige, right? So the Francophone countries have their laws are based on the Napoleonic law, where the English-speaking are based on English law, which is closer to the U.S., but not exactly the same. So there is some challenges to doing business in Africa.
Now,
main takeaway from these two officials was mainly no, the United States, contrary to views that are being expressed out there, especially in various news outlets, United States is not pulling out of Africa. Its interest in Africa still remains strong, and especially in promoting trade. This is shown in various activities that we can already witness in Washington being done. One of them is, for example, is the United States is engaged with the country of Kenya in opening negotiations to start a new trade pact with that country. They will not be doing that if there was an interest to promote or extend business relations with Africa. There are other countries also who are vying to do the same. So trade between U.S. and Africa will continue to grow under AGOA, even though AGOA may not be renewed in 2025 when it expires. The expectation is, as you heard, there will be other ways of other opportunities to continue promoting trade between the U.S. and Africa. Mr. Simpkins specifically emphasized lack of information being an impediment. Most entrepreneurs in the United States are interested in going to do business in Africa, but unfortunately, they don't know how to go about doing that. Conferences such as the one that was organized by the AU will help in that endeavor, and many are planned, other trade shows are also planned in the area to continue promoting both the trade opportunities and also information sharing as what exactly needs to be done for those who wish to participate. These same sentiments were earlier expressed by one of the panelists, Cote d'Ivoire's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Mamadou Haidara, who say the U.S. government has put forth a number of trade promotion avenues or vehicles, two of them, of course, being the AGOA and the Prosper Africa. That was the focus of this conference. Ambassador Haidara said what is needed is to synthesize U.S. business owners and investors about opportunities in Africa and to expand why it's important to expand or do business in that continent. He spoke of also one of the concerns some of these traders or some of the entrepreneurs might have is if they send goods to Africa, they may not get paid, but he emphasized saying that is not true because Africa remains one of the lowest, has the lowest payment default in all of the countries that have been studied to date. So there is really no concern for anyone who wants to do business to Africa to engage and send goods there, sell their services or products there with expectation that they will get paid according to those contracts they enter. We'll take a short break and come back on the other side to continue. Welcome back. You're watching Africa in Focus on Afrique Today TV. I am your host, Samuel Omwenga. Today we are focusing on what happened here in Washington, rather near here, Washington, in Baltimore, Maryland, where the African Union Office of Mission Office in Washington, D.C. hosted a USAfrica Trade Conference that was done in collaboration with the United States Agency for International Development and the African Diplomatic Corps. This conference was very successful, attracted quite a number of attendees as well as excellent panelists who spoke on different opportunities, and technical information was also provided about doing business in Africa. One of the people who spoke, one of the panelists who spoke was His Excellency Carlos dos Santos, who is the ambassador, Mozambique's ambassador to the United States. The ambassador said obstacles are always going to be there to do business with Africa or in Africa, but businesses and entrepreneurs should not look to those as impediments. Rather, they should find ways to go around those obstacles and find ways to do business in the continent. Ambassador dos Santos noted Prosper Africa and Deal Team in the U.S. embassies in Africa are doing great in expanding business and trade opportunities for American businesses and entrepreneurs seeking to do business in Africa, and to some degree vice versa. The ambassador also emphasized that foreign aid, trade, and investment are not mutually exclusive, rather they complement one another. The diplomat said African countries need aid to build their much-needed infrastructure, and this in turn opens opportunities for trade and investment. Noting the significance of sharing information, Ambassador dos Santos said it's essential to maintain regular dialogue between the United States and African nations at national and agency levels, as well as between the government and private sectors. This dialogue should be on equal footing instead of the U.S. imposing on these African countries, because it's so powerful, Rather, what should happen is the countries, both the United States and the countries in Africa engaging in these trade negotiations and dialogue, should do so on equal footing, on equal basis, because both know what they need each other, and they can engage and come to agreements which are mutually beneficial without one trying to take advantage of the other, especially the U.S., as it's always claimed. Speaking earlier to Afrique Today TV, His Excellency Sadiq Abubakar Y, who is a Sierra Leone's ambassador to the United States and also chair of ECOWAS diplomatic corps, meaning ambassadors from West Africa who are serving in Washington, the organization. He is the chair. He spoke of constraints in trade policies affecting trade between U.S. and Africa, and in particular, U.S. immigration policy. Here is what Ambassador Y had to say. Sorry, we might not have that. Okay.
Surely under the AGOA, because I attended the AGOA conference in Ivory Coast, there's a lot to be done in terms of really meeting our quota with AGOA in selling products to this country. But you remember, as I mentioned during my intervention, there are constraints, not only on the side of Africa, but this part of the world. Specifically, trade policies also influence, precipitated by the ability of people to travel. When you look at U.S. Today, that was why I raised the question, the issue, how does immigration legislation and policies affect this free trade between our continent and here? So that's why we look at the Africa Free Trade Continent, the ECO currency integrating our countries, and then doing trading between ourselves is extremely important. So until we look at sitting down with these powers that be in the United States to see how can we work together as our respective countries on the continent to be able to have liberal trade policies that help both sides, not only on this one side, but our countries as well. Right. And these are some of the things that this kind of dialogue is extremely important, because they begin to understand the constraints that we face, and they begin to tell us their side of the story, and we tell them our side of the story and see how we could be able to work together in pushing that.
Another panelist who spoke during the conference is Charles Chiza Chumia, who is the acting head of Trade Division for the African Union. He focused on intra-regional trading on Africa, and specifically, this is the priority which the African Union has put forth. Sorry, this is one of the biggest priorities for African Union, meaning promoting trade within Africa as opposed to trade between Africa and outside countries, which should be promoted as well. But it's also important to focus and do something about intra-Africa trade promotion. Because of this, the vehicle that the African Union has chosen to drive this home is an agreement to create the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFTA, which was has been ratified by 24 countries, and others are continually studying it, and will likely have the agreement signed or ratified by all the 55 countries in Africa. ACTA aims to bring together all 55 African states and create a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of business, persons, and investments within Africa, and thus pave way for accelerating the establishment of one customs union for Africa, for all of Africa. This is a big trade agreement. We don't have enough time to cover it and what was said about it, but we do intend to follow up on it and continually bring you updates as to what is happening with these very important agreements. Perhaps something that was somewhat of a surprise to some of the people at the conference is how much the state of Maryland and other states are actively pursuing business opportunities in Africa or encouraging business investment from Africa. According to both Maryland Secretary of State, according to both Secretary of State for Maryland and Mr. Felix Obi of the Economic and Trade Development Task Force in the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. He said they both emphasized that Maryland has an array of resources available to help in the promotion of business and trade in Africa. Mr. Obi also spoke to us during the conference, and unfortunately we've run out of time, and we don't have time to run that interview. It is available, and some of you may have seen it on our platforms, but you can watch it online at afriquetoday.com, or you can also stream it through the application Afrique Today TV. Well, because of time, that's all we have for you for today. You can, again, watch all these shows online at afriquetoday.com, or you can watch it on Facebook, on Twitter, and also you can download the application Afrique Today TV and watch these shows anytime at your convenience. That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again in a week's time.